Hey everybody, this is Ari in the Air. Welcome back to the channel. Stoked you're here. Today, I've got another video in the series with my friend Gavin McClurg talking about subjects presented in his awesome new book, Advanced Paragliding. Today, we're going to share with you things that we've learned from our own paragliding careers, as well as the things that he's learned from his talks with the world's best pilot on his Cloud-Based Mayhem podcast. Today, we are talking about SIV and parachutes. It's a subject that is difficult to understand, and it's kind of scary because it's all about when things go totally wrong, but it's something we got to talk about. And today, I've got really good lessons for you on the subject. If you're a serious paraglide pilot, this book is just packed full of so many good tips and so many good insights. So I have a link in the description below to buy it. Consider that. As well, if you like this channel, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. That's patreon.com/AriInTheAir. I also offer philosophical coaching and paraglide coaching over Zoom. So if you need help with your paragliding career or your life in general, consider looking me up. Without further ado, here's Gavin and I with some big lessons about SIV and parachutes and some big lessons from advanced paragliding. Enjoy.
See ya.
Okay, Gavin, welcome back. Today we are talking about the next chapter in this awesome book, Advanced Paragliding. We're talking about SIV and parachutes today. The chapter in the book on 182 is why SIV and ground handling matter. And ground handling and SIV are two subjects that you've really banged the drum on a lot on the podcast. And I think that most people at this point who are trying to learn paragliding have heard the mantra that ground handling is where so much of the skill can be won safely. So let's start there.
Yeah, we've done a couple shows just dedicated to this. I have received a little bit of pushback on that from various times. You know, I think that certainly on the SIV, there's more pushback. And when you talk to SIV instructors, they will be the first to admit it's maybe not for everyone. And so we'll get to that. But when it comes to ground handling, my own personal feeling is there's really no excuse. I feel like it's always part of our game that can be sharpened a ton. You know, it's what I try to spend a really good deal of time on in my own personal flying, especially when I'm ramping up for the X Alps, because I know it's going to be windy and cross and lousy and tight launches. And, you know, where do we get hurt? We get hurt on the ground. We get hurt launching and landing. We very rarely get hurt in the air. And so, you know, I think that if you're just, it's also, don't you see, you know, in your own life and when you're going to the hill, people that are Jedis on the ground, there's a confidence that is in them that I think helps with the rest of the day, right? I mean, people that are gripped and tight and not moving around and not in, you know, a second behind moves and just, you know, they're not smiling and they're shaking, you know, how can that translate into a good flight? I think it's pretty hard to, you know, so we have to look at the, you know, a big XC day does not start when we get to the hill, right? It starts the night before or even the week before. You've looked at the forecasts, you've planned it out. You're not going to make any schoolboy errors. Your instruments are charged. You're in reach. Everybody has your addresses. You know, something happens, you know, you're ready. You know, you're not trying to deal with that stuff in the morning. You've had a good night's sleep. You've eaten well. You're hydrated. You're ready to roll, right? And then you suck at ground handling. You know, that doesn't work.
It doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up. You know, these big days are often going to be a little bit turbulent, and that can start on the ground. And so, I just think that some of us, I don't live in a very good place to handle ground handling or to practice ground handling, but that's a big one that I see over and over again in the book. You want to get good at flying, live somewhere that is conducive. That helps a lot. Theo purposely lives where he does near St. Hilaire because he's an acro pilot and he
Yeah. And
can fly every day.
the place has made him.
Yes, exactly. And, or Oregania or something like that. But I mean, I think that, when you look at acro pilots, the reason acro is so much less dangerous is because of how hard acro pilots train.
Yeah.
They're doing radical stuff on their wings, but they ground handle all the time. And they get really good at that. And that translates directly into flying your wing without looking up. And that's important. If you're spending all the time flying around going like this, you're not observing the sky. You're not going to go very far. So, but if all that stuff is totally, every time you go out and ground handle, you're building instinctual reactions and you're feeling the wing and what it's doing. And so these are all obvious things that are hopefully being taught in ground school when you're first learning and getting your P1 and what you hear. But I just, I like ramming it home. And, I frequently find myself lacking in that skill. I have practiced it a ton over the years, but you get dull very quickly. It needs to be something you keep working on.
Yeah, it is. I'm so blessed because where I live here in Oregon, my local flying site, Pine Mountain, we have kiting paths. And the typical flight is that I get my glider out in the parking lot and I clip into it and I kite up to launch.
Cool.
And
That's
so
great.
I have been ground handling since I've started paragliding, and I've done it so much. And we top land all the time. We kite through the sage where you can't set your glider down. So there's all this this big obstacle course that is our local flying site for kiting that makes it so much fun. There's rocks and there's bushes and there's trees and you got to go around things and you can't stare at your glider or you'll trip, and you can't stare at your glider or you'll miss your lines. And so I've learned a lot of things about ground handling, and what you say about building your reflexes is what I think is the heart, the essence of why you ground handle. Of course, it makes launching easier, more enjoyable, and safer. But in reality, and this takes a long time to realize, but like every configuration your glider can get into in the sky, it can get into on the ground.
Totally.
As far as collapses, it's not going to sat on the ground, but getting used to these responses. What happens when you take an asymmetric collapse and pull too much brake trying to keep it on heading? Well, it stalls, and then what does it look like? And so you can learn so much on the ground. And I feel like we're going to beat a dead horse if we talk about this too much more. I've talked about this ad nauseum on my YouTube channel, and you have talked about this so much with so many different people on your podcast. So
yeah, I'm just still surprised that it's not taken a little more seriously.
I'm surprised that the level of ground handling is not higher internationally.
It's not higher. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think Kriegel has a little quote in this chapter of the book that, ground handling needs to be safe, but challenging. Yeah. That's another big one. I used to do a lot of practice in a soccer field where the air was pretty laminar and, I could handle a ton of wind. Well, we don't launch off flat fields. That doesn't, you need to, like you said, make it challenging and make it fun, so have obstacles, do it with friends, try to take them out of the sky, chase around each other, bash into each other, run around bushes, that kind of thing. I often make a course with cones and stuff.
Yes. And I was just going to say that.
Try to get through it really fast. And, I think that there's a lot of opportunity out there that, people who are all just fired up about paragliding, especially in the early days. They talk about, I do every sledder and I never miss a morning. Yeah, but add that other component. That's terrific. But I think, an hour's worth of ground handling is worth dozens and dozens of flights, sledders,
Yeah, it can
it's
be
not
in
the
the right
same.
conditions, in the
In
right
the right
conditions.
conditions. Yeah.
And there's
Like
a
you said,
quote.
if a soccer field with this laminar, okay, that's not that
Yeah.
valuable. But if it's challenging, then it's valuable.
Well, I think one of the things that people get turned off by is they go to the flat soccer field to pull the glider up and they set it down, and they pull it up and they set it down. And they say, what the fuck am I learning here? Nothing.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right. Set up cones, do box drills. Can you kite left? Can you tack into the wind? Can you tack downwind? Can you tack upwind? Like all these different things, like spinning the glider, doing like stalls, and then catching the glider by the A's before it hits the ground. Like there's so many different things that you can practice. But there's this quote here by Kelly Farina that talks about how pilots who struggle with their launches and ground handling often perpetuate their weakness because they don't want to be embarrassed, so they don't work on it.
Big one. Yeah. I like that.
That gets to the more like emotional root of why it might feel a certain way to, and this comes back to our men's work in paragliding. This comes back to the emotional side, and like what you don't think you're good at, you avoid working on. Or if you're humble and you take advice and you look at yourself clearly and you say, okay, I need to work on my ground handling game, because Gavin and Ari have talked about it ad infinitum, and every other good instructor and pilot and Kriegel and Kelly Farina and fucking Tio DeBlick. I don't know how many other people you need to have tell you that you need to be really, really solid on the ground to have a long and safe paragliding career.
Yeah. I mean, this peer pressure thing is super real in our sport, and we don't want to be embarrassed, and we all do have egos, and so if you're struggling with that, then go do it solo somewhere. We can't just say, oh, dude, get over that. It's a real thing, and Kelly's very correct in pointing it out, and but better to correct it than to get hurt.
Yeah, I agree. I want to come back to SIV now, and I want to start with a case against it.
Okay.
I have noticed that a lot of people who go through SIV then think that everyone needs to do SIV.
Mm-hmm.
That it's so important that everyone do SIV. And I disagree, because I think that there is a type of paraglide pilot who needs not ever to stall his glider, right? Like you can learn to paraglide at Torrey Pines and paraglide at Torrey Pines for 30 years and have no use for full stall training. There's just no need for it. You can soar coastal air on a paraglider for years and years and years. There's so much of that around the world. So much of paragliding is coastal soaring, right? Yep. Like I love flying in the mountains and I love flying the American West, but there is a huge proportion of our community that wants to soar. Okay. So the idea that everyone, like as a blanket statement, once you have 100 flight hours or 40, that you should do SIV, I just have to reject. I think it is right when it's right for the right people and for the right reasons. I have seen so many videos of like instructors, and this is a personal trauma that I have, watching videos of a woman who's very close to me be kind of like shouted at by her SIV instructor to do another maneuver when she was clearly out of her zone of tolerance. She was out of it and she said, I don't want to. And he said, do it. And she does it. And I'm just like, oh, the override there is just crazy. So there's a couple things that I just want to talk about in SIV. The first thing is that SIV might engender a false sense of security or safety, that you have a life jacket on, that you have someone on radio, that there's a rescue boat, that there's water underneath you.
Yep.
Paragliding is incredibly dangerous, and SIV is one of the most dangerous things you can do in paragliding, because you are going to take the most dangerous scenarios, and even though you have tried your best to cushion the edges of this thing, you're going to induce the most dangerous scenarios of paragliding on purpose. So the fact that SIV is or like the idea that SIV is safe, it's not safe. It can make your flying safer in the long run, but the act of doing the thing, it's very dangerous. And not all another point that I will make is that not all SIV instructors are made equally. Not all instructors are made equal. Like that's just how it is. Like I have a incredible respect and admiration for Jockey Sanderson. And like, I know like dude's got crazy amount of hours. He's done that for so long. Right. But like, if you've been doing it for a couple of years, like the ability, just one instance, Luis Yepes is a paraglide pilot and instructor in Valle de Bravo. He's a friend of mine. And I have literally watched him take control of a paraglider through a radio, which is a art and a skill. And it's crazy. And it's like people freeze up in SIV, and some instructors can like really have a way to like control the paraglider through the person. And that takes a long time to build. It takes a long time to build. So not all SIV instructors are made equally. Okay. You want the Jockey Sandersons and the guys who have been doing this for a really long time. And it's not perfectly safe, and it's not for everyone. And it's also not like the timing for each pilot is very different. And I personally have never, not once, ever, and will never give over control to my paraglider through someone on a radio. That's just how I've operated. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I've come from a very, professional extreme sports in the past. So I basically went into my time of SIV where I had basically watched all the YouTube videos of Theo DeBlick doing full stalls that I could. I imagined what it was going to be like. I closed my eyes. I visualized it over and over and over. And I went to my friend who is a SIV instructor. I said, I want to do full stalls. This is what I'm going to do. He says, dude, you're on it. Like, here we go. And he towed me up, and I did my first 7 full stalls. I went to a Kike Chili. I did 100 full stalls. I did my first 40 helis, and I basically started training acrobatics for the next 4 years. So I skipped the fully accelerated full frontals and all that stuff and just went straight into acrobatics, which is definitely not the route for everyone. But my point is that was at like 200 flight hours for me. Like, so I wasn't like a super new pilot. And that's also not, I've heard Jockey Sanderson say that the earlier a student will do SIV with him, the better, because they don't have habits built, and he can just like instill the habits right off the bat. And so
I think everything you've just said, I was nodding the whole way. I totally agree. And I think everyone I've had on the show who teaches SIV, that's what I've heard. I haven't heard anybody say anything different than that. So I think you're absolutely correct. There's a lot to unpack there. One, it does build a sense of false confidence early, that your first SIVs, plural, should only inspire you to do more SIV, that you're not really, until they all, PALTAC, it's you name them, the people, the acro pilots, they all say, until you've done 300 stalls, you haven't really done enough stalls. Okay. So it's got to be something that really doesn't get your heart rate up. I mean, when you're talking right now about stalls, I'm excited. That doesn't make me fearful. In the beginning, it's fearful for everybody. That no one is just, oh, this is going to be awesome. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I have mentors who are XC Jedis who have never done a stall, who have never done an SIV. Yeah. So it's not, and these are people who fly big cross country in our mountains. Okay. So, is it absolutely necessary? No, I don't think I've heard any SIV instructor say that. It's a tool. It's part of your toolkit. And for us flying in big mountains in Lee and dealing with rotor, it's a tool that I personally want in my toolkit. I have used it many times in my career to get out of some nasty stuff. And so I'm glad I have that move. But do you absolutely need it? No. And I think what I've heard from Jockey and Malin and a bunch of others is that, the right person for SIV is you're really psyched to have that experience. You're really excited. You want to build your toolkit. You're, of course, hesitant and you've got some fear, and, full stall day in the course is always hysterical. Everybody's dead silent that morning. But you want to be really excited about doing it. And that could be at 1,000 hours, or that could be at 10 hours. Jockey has said he's had really good SIV students who are literally ENA right out of school, because they're stoked. They're often kids. They're often younger, so they've got different risk tolerance than those of us who are older. And but they're really excited to have the experience. And it does, because what you don't want is to go into an SIV like your friend maybe and get overwhelmed and come out of it worse than where you are. You've got more fear, less skill. And because then where do you go? Then you've got to build back up to that. And, so I think it really is on the SIV instructor to recognize where a person is. And what I love hearing from all of them that I've had on the show for the last few years, for a long time in the late 90s and the early 2000s, it was a checklist. You do the asymmetric collapse, you do the full frontal, you do the full frontal bar, you go through the thing. Chris Santa Cruz used to have a video of, all the stuff that you had to learn. You had to watch all this stuff before going to him. For the most part, none of them do that anymore. For the most part, now it's, your first flight is they're going to see you do a 360 to exit. How well do you do that? That's going to tell. There are CCC pilots in the World Cup that don't do that very well. Yeah. And so they know right away, this is where this pilot's at in their progression. We just talked about progression in the last video. So, that if you nail that, then okay, we can start you here versus here. And so I think that, for a lot of people, they're not even going to get to stalls in that first week of the SIV, because you don't have it here. And it doesn't, like you said, you haven't visualized it. You don't really understand the mechanics of what happened and what has to happen. Then there's the whole wing side of things. What wing are you flying and how much passive safety there? I hate that word, but I think that it's definitely not for everyone. It can definitely give you a lot of false confidence. I've done an SIV. Again, that to me is, I have a rating. Who cares? Unless, if you've done thousands of stalls, 100, at least 300 stalls. Okay. That means something to me. You have that move. You're probably going to be able to get it. If you take a cravat, you're not going to hesitate to stall it if you've got the height to do it. And, great. That's a really nice tool to have. If you don't have some of these tools, then you better be pretty good at throwing a reserve and understand that you're taking on more risk. Yeah, I would say, I think it's a great tool. I think it's part of the training puzzle, but it's not all of it.
Yep. I agree. And on the other side of the equation is that it's incredibly helpful. It is so illuminating. It shows you what is possible, like what your glider is capable of. You're like, the amount of power an ENA glider can produce and like lock you out into a twisted sat is just like, dude, it's humbling, right? It should be humbling. It should show you what the fringe of the glider is.
Yes. And that show we did with Malin, those of you who are watching this, if you haven't listened to that one, you have to. He's a British pilot working for Flyo with Fabian, who's a legend SIV instructor in Annecy. And he talks about that they're, we think of these lower end gliders as being so safe. And he said he has seen ENBs, low end ENBs, do stuff that a CCC glider would never do. Yeah. Any glider can get you in a lot of trouble. And so again, I think putting them in these scenarios and understanding how to deal with it and understanding that you're going to be probably okay, but recognizing that SIV still is dangerous and is a really good thing. And your last point, I don't want to, there's a bunch of stuff that you started with that opener. The instructor side is so key, man. And it's not, and there are instructors who are good that may not work for you. It depends. We all learn differently. But I have seen just flow state in these instructors. Yeah. And like you said, they've got this line of communication to this person in the sky. I can barely see. My eyes are going to hell. I can barely see what's going on. And
Yes.
they're 3 seconds ahead of where those pilots are all the time.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
It is
But
awesome.
the ones that I've seen that have done that, that's all they do. They do it year round
Yeah.
and they do it all the time. They don't do a couple SIVs. They're not an instructor, and they do some SIV.
Yeah.
These are SIV instructors. And because you get really good at seeing all the stuff, there's only so many configurations you can get in. There's only so many things a pilot can do.
Yeah.
They can lean, they can brake, right? And they can look. And so they, you know, they're seeing what's going to happen before. And the best ones are so calm and so chill and just, you know, and but they've given you a really good ground. They've given you a really good, you know, visualization exercise in the morning. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Let's go through it again. What are you going to do? Here's what, you know, so, you know, you're not thinking about the launch and all that stuff. Okay. You've got it in your head. You can understand the sequence of events that's going to happen. And then you've got this nice, calm voice on the headset that's taking you through it. Then you leave that SIV and you go fly 50K and you cross country and you lose your glider. Guess what's not happening? There's no calm dude on the radio. You gotta solve this on your own. And you just done one SIV. Good luck, dude.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck.
So I think what we're talking about here with the SIV and the ground handling is that you want to find safe containers for you to learn about the fringe characteristics of you and your paraglider.
Yeah.
And learning about the fringe, this is why acro pilots are envied in cross country, is because they've seen all the configurations and they're used to it. Mm-hmm. One thing, you know, that I've heard from XC pilots is that, oh, acro pilots and XC aren't as safe because they think they can figure it out. And I say, no. Acro pilots are safer because they know when to throw.
That's they know when to throw. Statement that person just said. That's ridiculous. Acro pilots can solve everything and they know when to throw. That's the most, I mean, I guess that would be the most important thing, isn't it? That comes out of SIV.
Exactly.
Is thinking about your height and knowing when to throw.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Usually that's not too sure about this, bro. You know, that it just has to be you can't hesitate, right? When you need to use it. I was just down in Via. You mentioned it at the top. There were 1 or 2 reserve tosses every day. Guess how many injuries there were?
Zero.
That's amazing. Via's got these huge freaking canopies and nothing underneath. And there were no injuries. None. They work so well. You gotta throw them. So
yeah, and that's basically what happens in my head every time. Like something blows up, I look at it. I'm like, is it recoverable? Is it recoverable? And I'm like, yes. I've thrown my reserve one time. It was doing helicopters, line twist into a death spiral, and it became obvious. I was like, it is time to throw. Yeah. So I totally agree. I want to get just really quickly here. That's a joke because you and I don't do anything very quickly talking about paragliding.
Good luck. Huh?
Yeah, good luck. But about parachutes, I think that everyone wants the best parachute. And we have this mantra that I want to have controversial. I just want to let myself be controversial about this opinion too, is that, you know, I just repacked my reserve 2 nights ago. I don't feel any better about it than I did when it was in there. I took apart a factory pack job and repacked it. And I'm like, that was stupid. Why would I do that? You know, I let it go 2 years or 3. And then I was like, fuck, I'll take it out of there. I don't necessarily think that a parachute has to be repacked every 6 months or every season to have any kind of advantage of opening performance. I do for myself. I will take the reserve out of the harness. I will open the container. I will inspect it. I'll make sure the lines are clean. Also, God, there was some story of some pilot who thought he was good, who did acro and threw his reserve and it wasn't connected.
God, who was that?
Who was that?
What a batshit crazy guy.
What an idiot.
Yeah. Jesus, what an idiot.
No, that was Gavin. So, you know, I actually like what my friend Matt Hinsey has said about parachutes, which is that The most important thing about reserve parachutes is that they're there and they're connected.
Yes, I think those two things are pretty important.
And the third thing there that's really important is that they're thrown, right? Like it doesn't, I mean, it does help you some to have a parachute under your butt if you're crashing into the ground, but probably better if you needed it that it gets thrown.
Let me, I have learned quite a bit about reserves also since publishing the book. So some of this isn't in the book. One is Matt Wilkes and his whole team have done some amazing work on reserves that has been published in Cross Country Magazine this past year. So they've got a ton of data and have made a ton of recommendations to the manufacturers. The leading one of those is we should all have our reserve handles in the exact same place in every reserve. I'm sorry,
or in every harness.
In every harness.
It should be standardized.
Yeah, because Dio talks about that. That's actually in the book, but how important it is to every time you launch, go through the maneuver of getting to the handle. I do that every single time. I do it in the X Alps.
You do.
I mean, I do it every single time I get into the air. He instilled that in me. So, you come down your leg out to the knee, down to the thing, and there's the handle, right?
Interesting.
But I fly 6 different harnesses.
Yeah.
So X Alps, that doesn't work for me because it's a front mount. And so I got in a lot of trouble that day when I threw and it wasn't attached because the first one I threw wasn't attached, right? Dumbass. But there were some seconds there where I looked at this beautiful thing flying behind me and realized it wasn't attached and went, first I literally did this. That's funny. and the second thought what I didn't have as my second thought was I was in my acro harness. I had another reserve on the other side. Yeah. I don't usually fly an acro harness. That wasn't part of my makeup back then. Now my cross country kit, I have 2 reserves at home, but it took me half a second to go, well, fuck, dude, you've got another one. And by the time I got to that one, I mean, I was really low at the first one. And so the second one, I didn't have a shot anyway, but the second one I threw and I watched it roll out to the end and then I hit the deck. So, I mean, it didn't have time to deploy, but
oh, wow.
It was, maybe that half a second, if I had just gone, that's funny, wham, maybe I doubt it, but I was pretty low at that point, but maybe, but anyway, it's, I think that my point here is you got to know your gear really, really, really well. And then the other thing I learned, I was doing some acro training with Dylan down in California before the last X up this spring. And Logan gave a really good talk, Logan Walters, on reserves. Basically, what we've learned about reserves is if you've got a reserve that's 10 years or older, or you've got a round, get rid of it. Re-update your reserve stuff. The
modern reserve technology has gotten so much better.
A lot better. And make sure in lightweight reserves know that you are, just like flying lightweight gear, you're compromising your safety big time. So in other words, in the X Alps, I fly 100 kg reserve. Okay. So I'm right up at the top. That means I'm coming down and it's a round, or now it's a square, which is better, but I'm coming down at 6 meters a second. 6 meters a second is really fast. And so, if I come down in the rocks, I'm going to hurt myself. If I come down a nice soft ground or that's got something and I can do a nice PLF, hopefully I'll be okay, but I still might break an ankle or something. So, understand the risks you're taking, in other words, cutting a half a kg on your reserve to fly one that you're right at the top of is not a good idea. If you're not competing in the X Alps, that's not where you want to be shaving weight. If you really need to shave weight, shave it somewhere else. Don't shave it.
I have guided as many people as have asked me to buy the biggest reserve they can because it's just better. And Logan Walters, I take his recommendations on reserve parachutes quite seriously. He's very smart. He's a great pilot and a very nice person. I like him a lot. I also want to encourage people to, in their communities, repack their own reserves.
Yeah.
There is this thing where like people are afraid to touch their gear. And I think that is awful. place to be.
No, as clubs, we should be doing these kind of repack clinics,
I agree.
Together as a club thing. Get some beer, maybe not too much beer, but hang out and do it, come it all together and do it together. And you get good at it pretty quick.
It's not that hard, man. They're incredibly simple.
For 15 years. It was just, I don't want to touch it. They're incredibly simple. Beamers are harder, but the steerables are harder, but they're still not that hard. You do a few of them and you kind of get it. And it's a skill that we all need to, that should also be part of our toolkit. Again, I think where it lends a hand is confidence. And we all struggle at times with confidence, and we can't struggle with confidence in this sport. It's one of these things. You've just got to be confident when you go flying. And, so if you're really good at ground handling and you've done a bunch of SIVs and a bunch of stalls, and you've packed your reserve and feel really good about it, and it's connected to you, then you're just one step ahead. It's just, why not?
Emotionally, you just have
emotionally, you're just more calm, more ready for the day. You can attack it a bit harder. Imagine being in a lean, gnarly situation, and that's what you're thinking about. Oh, shit, I hope my reserve is okay.
Yeah, wait until you take a big blow up and you look up and you have that mantra in your head. Is it recoverable? It will also make you think, how's my reserve?
I love watching, there are certain people on social media that are really important to follow. And I think that Theo is one of them. He puts out so much content, and he's so good about sharing all of his mistakes. And, this is the best in the world. He's the best acro pilot there is right now. I mean, those guys bounce back and forth in the comps, but, he just put up one the other day where, he kind of, it didn't look that bad. He kind of blew a move a little bit. I think he was doing that, straight into infinite move or coming out of it.
Super stalled.
Can't even remember. Yeah. And all of a sudden his reserve pops out.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, that it looked like he could have saved that. But then he put in a thing that he'd had some line damage. That
his A's, the whole right side of his A's blew out.
They just blew out. And he didn't, it was like, I think they were starting to scissor and he threw. It was so fast. Did you see that? It was incredible.
It was amazing.
Wham! And and I want to throw like that, dude.
Me too.
That's so inspiring. It's just
me too.
I don't know. Maybe I can pull this off. I'll probably be all right flying my beast. It's what, bam! No, he was just instant. To have that kind of recognition and speed.
And that's actually how
confidence in your reserve, right?
Yeah.
It's just, these things are amazing.
It is.
Kit. They're incredible.
So two things. One is that the one time that I threw my reserve, I had like this out of body experience where I became Randy Johnson, and just like my arm threw my reserve so fucking hard. It was just incredible. And I didn't like pull it out and then throw it. I just like grabbed the handle. And it was just like, bow to line stretch, bang. It like open. I was like, yeah, that was good. And then the glider came around and just ate it up into the lines. And I was like, oh God. And I was just like in 8 line twists, nose down, spiraling, my fucking reserve stuck in the lines of the glider. I reach over for the second handle. And right as I put my hands on it, I just have this huge explosive sound. I'm like, what the hell is happening? The reserve came through the lines and opened, and now it was tangled in the risers. So it was like tangled in the risers right here by my head. It was holding my head down. It was a fucking nightmare. But I did find that in the moment that I really needed it, I did. My animal just took over and was like, reserve now.
Yeah.
And the other thing is,
get it out.
You just mentioned that a video of Tio throwing his reserve so fast when he knew he needed it. The other video that is the most amazing reserve deployment is Pal Takesh when he does the first attempt of tandem tumbling, right? He was working with U-Turn and they built this glider, and it's him and another acro pilot, and they're in Turkey, and he pulls into it, and at the first tumble, it just, all of the A's simultaneously explode. And before, I swear to God, dude, like before the glider, like, I don't even know what the time of it is, but it is like such an incredibly short time before his Regalo is flying. And it's just like, it's like bang. And it's like reserve, It's just like so fast.
Yeah, the acro guys are, the numbers they talk about in terms of how much they throw is a little eye-opening. It's not a little, it's a lot eye-opening. And these guys throw all the time. And
Well, I don't know.
throws all the time.
Tio's only at like 20, right?
Yeah, but that's a lot of throws.
Yeah.
Is he only 20?
I think it's only 20.
I got the feeling from him it was way more than that.
I also want to say, I just heard that Matank has thrown his Regalo 15 times and loves it.
Yeah.
Cody's awesome. Shout out to Cody. But the other thing, I know Christina Kolb, who's the female world champion acro. There was a time, I think she won the world championships of acro without ever having thrown her reserve. I know Cesar Arevalo, who just got like third or something, and like he got first in synchro. Dude's never thrown his reserve.
That's amazing.
Never
okay, I had no idea. I thought they all threw all the time.
No, they don't. There is a way to progress in paragliding safely, even all the way through acrobatics, that you don't have to be right on the edge. Obviously, Tio, the video you're talking about, his glider blew up. Like that was, he went through the lines. He went through the lines and fucked up the lines. And then when he tumbled it, it blew up. So yeah, fair enough.
And I'm not an acro pilot, but I mean, I do some acro, but I wouldn't call myself an acro pilot by a long stretch. But I think there's also, there are certain Raul and Pal and Dio, there are acro pilots that invent, and there are acro pilots that just get really good at what the stuff is scoring. And I think the inventors just by default, they have to get themselves in a lot of trouble. They're on
the tip of the spear a little bit.
Yeah, they're on the spectrum, right? So it's a different spectrum. I don't mean this spectrum, but well, they're probably there too. We're all there. We're paragliders, a bunch of lunatics. But I mean, I think that my point is that we don't want to be afraid of these things, and they do work. I'm a big proponent of having two. If you're flying XC, if you're flying Torrey Pines, I don't think you need two, but I think your situation is a good example of that. Tom Payne had a great example of that on the show, doing helis and throwing a reserve, kind of went into an auto rotation situation, throwing a reserve into his glider. That's in a sense what got me in a little bit of trouble this spring when I had my crash, was that I was very low to the ground, under 100 feet, when I went into an auto rotation. And because I just done all this training, I just done all this work with Dylan, I had the collapse, looked up as I started going and I was reaching for my reserve. It was just, I'm too low. There's no question here. So that was all correct. Right. But right before I threw, as I start going into the auto rotation, my next thought was, I've got one. And I got one chance. And if I throw this thing into the wing, which you often do if you're in an auto rotation, I'm dead. And so I went back to active piloting, took care of the auto rotation, and then threw. But losing that height was costly, and I hit the ground really hard. I mean, the reserve saved my life, but it was the point is we've got to use them, and we've got to be comfortable in using them. And there's a lot of the incidents that I've seen are when people don't throw, and I assume most of the time it's because they lose track of where they are in the sky.
Yeah.
And so one of the most important things is Theo's having that mental, just where that memory thing is, because we can get in weird positions, right? If you're in a proper cascade, it's not so easy as just looking over and finding that thing and throw it. You might not be able to look. So which hand? I still am a huge proponent of both brakes in the hand, especially if you're low, because you do not want that wing to restart. Yeah. So, first thing is just get that wing down in some kind of gnarly tail slide, not even a deep stall, just get that thing so it's buckling, so it's not able to restart, and then huck, just do it. You've got to make it happen. And I think that's, but check your height. If you've got tons of height, you got some time to solve it. And if you've done the training, then, you maybe don't need to go immediately to reserve. But I've seen every major accident I've seen, an air accident, has been people ride it all the way to the ground trying to solve their problem.
Okay. We gotta wrap it up here.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think to summarize, we've talked about ground handling, which is incredibly important in keeping you safe on your launches and ultimately in the air, because handling your glider is handling your glider. The other thing we talked about is SIV, which is a double-edged sword. It's incredibly important. It can teach you the fringes of your glider. It can teach you when you need to throw your reserve. It can make you familiar with all of the configurations, but it's not just a soft, cushy room. It is dangerous. It's not for everyone, and not every instructor is created equally. You really want to give it some consideration. When is that time right for you? Have you prepared enough to get out of it what you possibly can? And how can you stay safe? Don't let yourself not be the pilot in command at the end of the day, even at SIV, even with the most experienced instructors. So, and then the last thing that we talked about is parachutes. To summarize the parachute thing, I want to just reiterate what Logan said, which is if it's more than 10 years old and if it's a round, you need to get a not round. You want to get a size large square, a regalo, a size large. What Logan has recommended is the Niviuk Octagon parachutes. He's seen the best performance in his SIVs with the Octagon. So those are really highly recommended from him. And I respect his opinion on those a lot. And make sure that they're in your harness, connected, and when you need it, you use it.
Yep.
Great. On to the next chapter, Gavin. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, dude.